Welcome to the Kenneth Show, a caller-driven show where we talk about mental health, we talk about dating, relationships, and any issue that you would like to share with us.
We're excited to have somebody special on the show today.
Today, we are going to be talking to a family lawyer who specializes a lot with divorce, and they're going to share a lot of the surprising or shocking things that you may not know about divorce, going through a divorce, or the process of divorce, and many of the things that she sees that you probably don't know about. So this should be an interesting call. So joining us today is Deborah. She's in her mid-40s, and she is a lawyer that specializes in family law, particularly tough divorces, custody battles, and things of that nature. You know, when you're going through a divorce, it's one of the most painful, confusing, and scary things of your life. And so you really want to have someone that is by your side that can help protect you in these kind of situations.
Right. We're excited to have somebody from a different perspective, a different expertise that can chime in on some of these serious issues. Divorce, separation, all of these things are really tough to manage. So any perspective that we can get, we appreciate.
Yeah, because I think there's probably a lot of things that we don't understand when you're going to go into that process. Mm-hmm. You think it's going to be simple and quick and easy, but it's not. Is it, Deborah?
Exactly. Thank you, Coach Craig and Coach Victoria, for having me, first off.
Oh, you're welcome. We're happy to have you.
One thing that I would suggest, and of course this isn't legal advice, but if you're going through arguably one of the most difficult times of your life, you really want to be careful what attorney, if anyone, you retain, because that attorney can have a lot of influence in how your case unfolds. For instance, a younger attorney may not have client control, which could prolong a case and cause both sides to incur attorney's fees. Another attorney may have the reputation of just causing both sides to incur attorney's fees that aren't necessary. So I would just say, ask around to your friends, family, whoever about the attorney's reputation within your community before you retain him or her.
Yeah, so it sounds like your divorce is going to have a huge impact on who your divorce lawyer is going up against. And the case is going to go based on who they have more as opposed to the divorce process itself.
Correct. I agree with that statement.
Wow.
A lot of my clients have asked me, how do you see this case unfolding? And at that time, I don't know what attorney the other side has or will have. And often I tell my clients, if it's an attorney within the community, a lot of times I could kind of gauge how the case may go. Of course, you can't give guarantees, but each attorney has a reputation, and whether that be positive or negative, a lot can be said on that attorney's reputation.
That's really surprising to hear that you wouldn't really think about that as somebody who's getting a divorce. You're not thinking, well, who I hire as my lawyer is going to have such a huge impact on how this process goes, because it's like almost like you're going up against another chess player as opposed to like we're following this set of processes. Right. It's more like you're going up against somebody who's going to push for certain things or argue certain things or make their client fight for certain things.
Right, and it sounds like just like anything, their skill, their experience, their ethics, all of that matters in who you select.
Wow.
Correct. And, my family, not involving family law, but we have attorneys in our family that we use for various businesses. And the attorney that we have is very experienced. He's probably the brightest person I've ever met. But I'm never going to tell him how to do his job, because then he'd get rid of me as a client in a second. So you also have to gauge it where you feel comfortable with your attorney, but don't tell that attorney how to do his or her job.
Mm. Wow. That's got to be such an interesting dynamic too, because you don't know what you're talking about when you're sitting down with this lawyer. And yet you're trying to navigate your own future.
Yeah, and I guess you don't realize when you're going through it how much trust is placed on the experts. When you're going through a divorce, for example, during this time, you're in one of the most vulnerable states in your life. And so you might be susceptible to any influence, right, of any expert in any field. So this could be tough in choosing who to pick.
Correct. And I was recently contacted for a case that the potential client wasn't happy with her prior attorney and wanted to switch over to my office, but the case had been going on so long and I don't think it had been worked up properly, where I felt bad because I wanted to help her, but there was no way I was going to be retained on a case that, in my mind, I don't think it was worked up properly, and walk into a mess, because then I could potentially have issues with malpractice or just not dotting your I's and crossing your T's.
Wow. You certainly wouldn't think about that when you're going in to get help, right? You're just like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And, maybe you're having some major issues with your ex already.
And I want to ask, just because, I'm curious to hear more about the state that your clientele is in, but how do you find most of your clients that are going through a divorce? How do you see them? What things do they present with? Are they able to clearly and coherently tell you what's going on and give you an accurate picture?
I never trust a client 110%.
That's fun.
I think for the most part, I think what they believe is true, but of course there's always two sides. Most of my colleagues, though, will say that women need a little bit more, for lack of a better word, hand-holding versus men, and men make decisions more on business and financial reasons, but women have a tendency, in my colleagues' opinion, to want to be heard more and to base more of their decisions on emotion.
Interesting.
Rather than business.
And how would you say that often affects a case in the way that it goes?
If an attorney doesn't have client control, it could really affect a case, because that's what could prolong a case where you could have potentially reached settlement, but instead you're forced to go to trial and incur who knows how much in attorney's fees and costs, just because the other side is not being reasonable and just basing their decisions off of emotion.
Wow.
The worst case to have, in my opinion, I could handle an aggressive attorney, but the worst case, in my opinion, to have is an attorney on the other side who is aggressive but unreasonable. Because then you're dealing with someone who's aggressive, but then someone who is so unreasonable that you're never going to be able to reach a settlement, most likely, which ends up hurting both parties.
Sure.
Yeah. And this is tough because we talk about breakups as being grief. And we also talk about the mind during grief, just your cognitive state during grief. Most people can't really think clearly. So to make really big decisions about your life, your finances, your children's life during this time while deliberating with an attorney or a lawyer, that must be really, really challenging.
To comment on that, Coach Victoria, I agree with you. And I have had clients before where it's mostly men, where they say, I don't care, I just want the case done, give her whatever she wants, or they propose to give their ex-spouse more than what they would otherwise be entitled to because they just want the case done. And I do talk to them about thinking long and hard about that, because even if a case is quote unquote done, a lot of times in my experience, I see clients that it didn't make them feel better to get the case done a lot more quicker, especially if there's children involved. You're always going to be connected to this person. So I don't want to have them shoot themselves in the foot by offering more than what they would otherwise had to, just because they quote unquote want it done quicker.
Wow. Yeah, personally speaking, both my parents were married 3 times each, and I saw my mom get very petty with my dad, and it really had a huge impact on me growing up. They divorced when I was like a year and a half old, but that really had such a painful experience for me, because my dad was really painted out to be a villain, which, when he was younger, he did a lot of things that, he's not proud of, and immature things. But that had such a big impact on my relationship with him that I really wasn't able to connect with him till I was like in my 30s. So it's sad because, just because two parents aren't together, that process of divorce might have a huge impact on that child and their relationship with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, and children remember that too. It's really unfortunate because I see that a lot where parents try to put a wedge between the child and the other parent, where it's almost as if they hate the other parent more than they love their own child, if they're doing that in a way. I'm not saying, Coach Craig, in your situation, your mom did that, but in my experience, I see that a lot.
My mom didn't handle it too well either. My mom was very anxious. She's a very anxious person. And so I think what really scared her was that she was afraid that my dad was going to try and get full custody of me. And I think my dad wanted probably a lot more custody than she wanted to give. And I think that's where things really got messy.
Right. In the county where I work, there are a few of us that get appointed to represent children. And that's generally when the court doesn't know what parent to believe. They want the attorney to talk to the child to figure out what's really going on. It's almost like a mini custody evaluation. I mean, it's not, but because custody evaluations are so expensive, a lot of times minors counsel is appointed for that purpose, to represent the child's best interest. But those cases are heartbreaking.
How much does the judge consider with what the kids want, or they're saying they're wanting to go or stay?
Every state is different. I'm sure every county, these judges all rule differently, but where I practice, a lot of times they look at age, 12 and up, but then they'll also look at maturity. That's huge. And in the county where I practice, mediation is mandatory. So a mediator will meet with both parents at the courthouse in separate rooms if domestic violence is involved. And the mediator will also speak with the children separately to write a recommendation for the court if the parties can't reach an agreement regarding custody. And with that, it's great if the parties come to an agreement, but essentially I tell my clients, you're basically giving this mediator potentially a lot of power to write a recommendation for the judge. So if you could try to reach an agreement before, that's great.
Yeah. In my clinical work with teens, sometimes I find teens where the parents are going through a divorce are much more mature than the parents are. Speaking with the parents going through it, it's hard to find some kind of compromise to make things work for the kid. So a lot of times I'll be deliberating with the kid and I realize, wait a minute, where's the adult in the room here? Where's the adult to make the decisions? So I could see that being really, really challenging. Now, I don't know if this is a myth or if this is true, but I hear that divorce laws tend to favor women in terms of custody. Is that like an old myth? Is that something that's still true? I think there's a lot of fathers that fear that they will lose custody of their kids, and so they kind of just go along with the program with whatever the child's mother says. Is that something that's true?
I hear that a lot from clients, that it's a big concern of theirs. In my experience, no. Where I practice, the court is very, very fair, and they want to give the father 50% custody, if not more, as long as that's in the child's best interest. And they'll look at safety issues such as drugs or alcohol, any manipulation and alienation to the other parent. But I haven't seen that at all in over 10 years, which is great.
Do you ever have clients sit down with you and say, boy, I really didn't expect this process to go like this? Or, I don't know, I'm just wondering what that experience is like for somebody going through it. Any surprises?
I don't hear it a lot, but when I hear it, it's generally clients stating within what you just said that they're surprised by how quote unquote long it takes. And generally that's just because the courts are so backed up. It could be a month or two before you can even get a hearing date. unless there's an emergency in the case, that's a whole different issue. But generally, I think that they're surprised that it's not a quicker process.
Yeah.
Now, that's something else that I've heard, that in certain states there's a period of time that you have to wait before the divorce can actually be finalized. And so sometimes I'll be dealing with clients where, their partner has threatened divorce, or maybe they've started the process, but there's almost like this waiting period or holding period, and they're trying to repair their relationship within that time. And so they feel like, oh, this is like the crunch period before papers are signed, and then there's no turning back. Is that true? Are there certain states that have longer times versus than others? What does that look like?
In California, there's a 6-month waiting period, so you legally cannot get divorced for 6 months.
Wow.
I'm not certain about other states, but I would assume so. And of course, everything I say is not advice to anyone because every case is different. But
yeah, of course. Kind of like breakups.
Yeah. And do they do that for a reason? Is there like almost like this government, okay, we hope you're going to get back together in these 6 months. Are you sure you want to do this? Think about it for the next 6 months. Why is there this holding period?
My understanding is because it's exactly what you just said, to make sure the parties want to get divorced and not have any regrets.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, yeah. You must see a lot of stories that really take you by surprise, or hear about stories that are like, wow, I can't even believe what's going on with this case.
Mm-hmm.
I do, and I hear about them a lot through my colleagues. Attorneys exchange stories all the time.
Oh, at the bar?
I would love to just eavesdrop.
But some of the stories you cannot believe.
Got any that you could share with us?
Let me think. My colleague had a case recently, and his client was a stuntman, did very, 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 very well. And he wasn't of retirement age, but he wanted to retire because his body was beat up, and rightfully so. I mean, you're throwing yourself out of cars at 50 miles per hour, doing whatever you're going to do. And
that's just your average breakup.
And his ex-wife said, no, you are able to work. You should work. And he had doctors provide testimony that his body physically cannot handle it. And so both parties went through what's called a vocational evaluation, where a professional comes in and makes a report regarding that party's earning capacity. And meanwhile, the ex-wife had never worked in her life. But it was great because they were unreasonable. The ex-wife's side was unreasonable throughout the whole case. But the vocational evaluator, she made a report that said, I agree, husband can't work, his body's beat up. But guess what, wife? You haven't worked since your 20s, but you're capable of working and going to sit down at a desk job. So it backfired on her.
I mean, no, but that's fair. Like, if you're being unreasonable and the courts see it that way, then why should, one person be taken advantage of that much without the judge saying, hey, hold on here. No, we're going to hold you accountable because now that I see the way you're trying to manipulate the situation, you should be the one that's facing this consequence, not that person.
Yeah.
Right. And he did very well, where they owned a couple homes that were worth over $1 million a piece, paid off. He had a retirement that was divided in no debt. So it's not as if they were struggling financially. It sounds like she was just doing it more out of spite.
And it's hard because when we're angry, we want to punish people, but we have to understand the difference between our emotional state and the law and ethics and, things of that nature. It's so different. Sometimes our own anger can bleed into, the legal space, and, it's treated much differently there. It's seen much differently there.
I agree. And hopefully that's where the person has a really good attorney that can control them when their anger is starting to get out of control, so they don't make unwise decisions.
Yeah. So your job is part therapist too.
Sometimes it feels like it.
I can imagine.
Now, I have a big question. With your experience working with divorce, what has that taught you about marriage? Do you have any advice on people who are thinking about getting married, getting the government involved in their love affair? What would you say to them from what you've learned?
To my closest family members and my friends, I would say to get a prenup, depending upon their financial situation. But even with a prenup, they could, if it's not well written, it could be invalid, and then that could bring on a whole host of issues. In addition, you have to be careful too, because even if you have a prenup that says, I'm just making this up right now, it protects the home, that it's your separate property prior to marriage. If your spouse has a spending problem and is racking up a bunch of debt or credit card debt, and during the marriage and you state, well, I didn't know about it, you're still going to have a hard time arguing that that debt should be awarded to her.
Wow.
So know who you're marrying.
Wow.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of people change, or they disguise things or hide things from you, especially in the beginning. And so if you get married too soon, you're going to be surprised by somebody's characteristics down the road.
Right. Most of my clients are in their 50s, and I don't find a lot of cheating. I find more of my clients that are in their 50s and even 60s where they just sort of fell out of love, but they stay together for the kids.
And that makes sense, especially if the people got married young. People get married in their early to mid-20s. They have those kids, they've been distant for years, and now they're thinking, oh, my kids are going off to college, and I've been distant for this partner for the last 15 years. I want to live life before, I'm 80 and, wishing I had done this sooner.
My colleague had a case about a year ago. We were just talking about it today. And husband wanted the divorce. He represented the wife. And the wife was really upset that the husband wanted the divorce because they started this great business together. They raised their children. They were supposed to travel and enjoy life together. And a year had passed, and now she has moved on, and she's so happy. I know who she is. She is so happy. She met a great guy, and it turns out that their children, who are adults now, state that their father, who was her ex-husband, is still essentially miserable. And it's just nice to hear that she thought that she didn't want this divorce, and now she states, like, I didn't realize how miserable I was in this marriage, and now she's really, really happy, and she's moved on.
Wow. It's so interesting how the tables can turn, and even in a breakup, some of you resist the breakup so much while it's happening, and then you find yourself in a point where things are so different, and you do find happiness again. You are able to experience that again.
So when you're talking to your colleagues, do you see a lot of similar themes come up that you guys are talking about? I don't know. I'm just wondering if, like, when you get together, you guys have these particular issues that keep coming up that you think would be helpful or interesting for people to know?
I would state that we talk a lot about what other attorneys do in court. So I would just suggest, like, really know the attorney that you're retaining.
What about reasons for the divorce? I know you had mentioned falling out of love. What are other common reasons that people get divorced from your experience?
Definitely falling out of love. I've seen other reasons, but I wouldn't say they're common. I mean, there was one woman I represented, and her ex-husband had a sex addiction. I see a lot of alcohol issues. But I don't think, other than falling out of love, that I could say the reasons are really common. They kind of vary across the board.
Yeah.
And what would you say makes people the angriest during divorce? What do people get really riled up about?
The children.
Yeah.
More than any other financial issue, which is understandable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's tough. Parents don't want to spend less time with their kids,
And a lot of times I see where the other parent is generally not supposed to dictate what the other parent does during his or her custodial time. But the parent will sign up their children for an activity like a sports event, not discuss this with the other parent, but then get angry when the other parent can't always take the child because they had prior obligations.
Uh-huh.
I understand it where you may want your children to be in sports. I came from a big sports family, but I do see sometimes as well where the parent will sign up the child for all these extracurricular activities, not talk to the parent, and then when the other parent can't take the child, they try to paint this picture to the child that his father is a bad person because he couldn't take him or doesn't want to take him.
Wow. Yeah, that really would complicate it if they have, softball or baseball or something like that, and they got to go to their practice 3 days a week. And not only that, if one parent has more time than the other, they may say, well, I don't want to be spending my whole time at these practices. I don't get as much time with them as you do. I want to, be doing other things.
And the same difficulty happens with therapy too. I've had situations where one parent agrees to have the child go to therapy and the other one objects.
Oh, yeah.
And so then that's tough. Or there's one parent that's hoarding the insurance card information, and so the kid's not able to have access to therapy services. So there are dirty games that are played in divorce when it comes to the kids.
Yeah, and I'm always pretty suspect of those parents that don't want their children in therapy, especially where it's like, you think your child may be okay, but at the end of the day, their parents are still getting divorced, even if it's for a brief amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. Are there any things that you'd like to share with people that might be interesting or surprise them coming from your perspective?
Maybe tips on somebody who's going through a divorce that might help them through the process.
Here's a couple of tips that I would do. Number one, I always like to tell my clients, make sure you're working out every day for obvious reasons. It helps with anxiety. Coach Victoria and Coach Craig, well, I'm sure I've spoken all about that.
Mm-hmm.
I know they have. The second tip is make sure you listen to your lawyer. You're paying him or her to do a job, and you don't want to lawyer the lawyer. A lot of attorneys too that I have seen, they will drop a client if you don't allow them to do their job, because it can make their job a lot more difficult if you're not following their advice. And also, if you end up having to get a new lawyer, it doesn't look great in front of a court if you bounce around a lot between lawyers. So that's another reason why you want to know your lawyer and his or her reputation before you retain him or her. But also, if you're comfortable with that lawyer, don't do anything to sabotage that relationship where your attorney gets annoyed with you by you thinking you know more than him or her.
Yeah.
So it sounds like cooperate with the people that are trying to help you. Make sure that you find the right people. Reputation sounds like it's really important in the law world. And so, finding the right connections is important. And staying happy.
I would also state too that ask your lawyer what method of communication he or she prefers, because I know it seems not very personable, but I would rather have emails most of the time. That way I can look at them in court. It's easier to save. It's way less time and way more cost effective generally for my clients too, to send me an email versus always trying to get me on the phone.
That makes sense.
If a client's bill is high, this is several years ago, I have encouraged, send me emails. You're going to see your attorney's fees drastically decrease if you stick to emails and not call me.
That's a good tip.
Okay. Yeah, that is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those are all some helpful ideas to think about or consider when you're going through a difficult situation like this. I would say looking to get into therapy as well, because it will feel so much better to talk about it. It feels so much better when you have somebody you can get things off your chest to, instead of keeping it bottled up inside. You're going to go through a lot of different emotions and a lot of different painful experiences when you're going through this. And you're going to be dealing with somebody that's angry at you and resentful towards you and maybe trying to be spiteful with you. And that could really wear you down. So I think you got to do the best to take care of your own mental health to get through the process. Exercising, finding any hobbies or activities that you enjoy to feel better in a time that is so, it feels like it's upside down. Your life is upside down.
It's completely life-changing. So anything that you can do to kind of mitigate the effects of that trauma. Divorce can be traumatic for many different parties involved, for the parents, for kids. And so as you're going through this active trauma, you have to remember to take care of yourself as much as possible. I always talk about treating yourself like you're sick. You want to coddle yourself a bit. If there's ever going to be a time in your life where you coddle yourself, it's going to be, during the time of a divorce, during something really serious like that. So we're really grateful to have somebody with this wealth of knowledge and expertise and experience give us some insight on this, a whole different perspective that we could definitely use a lot more of. So we really appreciate you showing up for the show.
Yep. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.